Good evening. My name is David Rotenstein. I'm a public historian and folklorist based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my talk this evening, Concrete, Cork, and Cold Storage, documenting Pittsburgh's Federal Cold Storage Company building, derives from my research into the social history of numbers gambling in Pittsburgh, and it also incorporates more than 25 years of industrial archaeology work. I work as a consultant and writer here in Pittsburgh, and sometimes I do some adjunct teaching, and I lead walking tours and do other public programs in Pittsburgh and beyond. This evening, we're going to take a whirlwind tour through the spectacular slow-mo demolition of the building that for almost a century was the Federal Cold Storage Building. I've been involved with public history, historic preservation, and the like now for about 40 years. And I typically describe to audiences and students that a lot of my work involves bricks and mortar. Well, in this case, I'll be talking about concrete and cork, not necessarily bricks and mortar. So let's go on our whirlwind tour here. So this project began sort of as an out-of-pocket exercise that grew out of my 3-year-old research into the social history of numbers gambling here in Pittsburgh. And I, as a person with a strong background in historic preservation and the built environment, I use the built environment to tell stories related to the research into this distinctive variant of organized crime. And in navigating the built environment here in Pittsburgh and its ties to organized crime, there are overlays with industrial history. And as a historian who also has done many industrial archaeology projects, some of them I've written up for the SIA, the opportunity to get involved with learning more and telling the story of the former Federal Cold Storage Building was a really healing opportunity. So the building started coming down in the early fall of last year, and it had been advertised as an impending demolition for some time. It's located inside a National Register of Historic Places historic district. It's not locally designated, and because it's part of the National Register, but it's not using federal funds, there was no Section 106 requirement for any mitigation. But because Pennsylvania has a state history code, the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission did strongly suggest to the developer that they hire a historian to document the building before its demolition. One of the things that propelled me to document the demolition is the fact that the historian's product, that mitigation documentation, was less than satisfactory. Basically a 13-page report that glossed over much of the historical significance of the building, the context, and perhaps most importantly for us, the engineering and technological aspects of the building itself. So in addition to this 13-page report, the consultant also used a commercial photographer to take nice flashy photographs of the building that are not particularly telling or instructive for use down the road if folks want to learn more about this structure from an archive. So let me quickly introduce folks to the site. The Federal Cold Storage Building was located in a part of Pittsburgh known as the Strip District. It's located just on the edge of downtown Pittsburgh, sandwiched between the 16th Street Bridge and the highway leading from south of Pittsburgh up into the North Hills. You can see it illustrated in the circle and the arrow. For much of the 19th and into the 20th century, the site where the cold storage building was located was occupied by residences and stores on the edge of a heavily industrialized area, mostly taken up by a nail works production facility and other heavy metal production works. You can see the site illustrated in this 1872 real estate atlas, and again in this 1889 real estate atlas with the mixed residences and commercial space surrounded by this heavy industrial use. In this 1923 real estate atlas, you can see the emergence of the Pennsylvania Railroad's newly built produce yards. So Pittsburgh had two railroad yards dedicated to the intake of foodstuffs. They had a large stockyards on Hers Island in the Allegheny River, about 2.5 miles away from this site. And then they had the produce yard in the Strip District, which included the rail lines and a massive produce terminal that was built in the 1920s. And then here's a Sanborn fire insurance map that shows the footprint of the massive federal cold storage building just after it was constructed. Here we have an aerial photograph, again, taken just after the federal cold storage building was constructed. You can see the building here, the annex, the refrigeration ice production annex here, and then the massive Pennsylvania Railroad coal produce yards and the 16th Street Bridge there. This photograph shows a street view along Penn Avenue, the federal cold storage building here. This building here, you can see the barest outline of a shamrock and the word cafe. This will be an important part of the story as we move on into the site history itself. So let's talk a little bit about, where the federal cold storage building came from and how it fits into not just Pittsburgh history, but American history. It basically involves the collision of two ice entrepreneurs. The first was Harry Norval, who founded the Independent Ice Company in Cleveland in the 1890s, and in the first decade of the 20th century changed the name to the City Ice Delivery Company. Over the next decade and a half, he began to expand his business into fuel deliveries, coal, and built a fairly large business footprint in Cleveland, also building a substantial amount of wealth, so that by the time his company, the company that originated with his Independent Ice Company, got to the point where they started consolidating and buying properties in Pittsburgh, there were more than 128 plants throughout North America and 30 subsidiaries employing more than 4,000 people. You can see the obituary here. When he died, he left an estate worth nearly $70 million. His counterpart in Pittsburgh, John W. Hubbard, also built a fairly large ice empire in the city, but he started out in industrial entrepreneurialism by inheriting his family's tool foundry located on the Allegheny River. And before he got into ice, he was known as the Shovel King for his production of metal tools. He also expanded his family empire into buying and running riverboats on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. He established a short-lived amusement park in Ohio. He was a major shareholder in the Pittsburgh Brewing Company. And in 1899, he decided to get into the ice business by founding the Pittsburgh Ice Company. He later founded divisions of the larger Pittsburgh Ice Company in outlying boroughs like Wilkinsburg, Etna, and other communities. This is a shot of one of the Hubbard Company's facilities before the entry of Hubbard into ice. This is the shovel and tool works located at the foot of the 62nd Street Bridge, just opposite Etna and Sharpsburg. A picture of his stock certificate. And then here's a real estate atlas that shows the first location of the Pittsburgh Ice Company plant, located right along the Pennsylvania Railroad and conveniently situated in the city's east end. There's a shot of an early write-up of the Pittsburgh Ice Company showing one of the few photographs that survives, and an advertisement from 1901. Hubbard was a particularly colorful character here in Pittsburgh, not just for the amount of wealth that he built, but he liked to grace headlines, and throughout his life, he put his name on steamboats. He dated screen and stage stars. He got into fist fights with relatives, got into financial difficulties. He literally was one of the most colorful characters in Pittsburgh industrial history in the early 20th century. I was sort of shocked when I went to to look for his grave here in Pittsburgh, and I found this relatively modest family plot and stone, which doesn't even picture a shovel or a block of ice, which was a little disappointing. So Hubbard, between 1899 and the 1920s, did basically the same thing that Norval did in Cleveland. He built a regional ice empire that provided ice deliveries to individual residences, provided ice to businesses. He also provided ice for icing railroad cars passing through Pittsburgh from the Midwest to the East. And he was an attractive target for Norval as Norval began building his city ice and fuel company empire in the 1920s. Recall that by 1930, there were more than 128 plants. And to get that 128 plants, he had to acquire a substantial number of properties through mergers and acquisitions. And the Pittsburgh properties were part of that portfolio that Norval's company ultimately built. As he started crystallizing this ice empire throughout North America, these large cold storage buildings started to appear next to railroad yards in the cities where City Ice and Fuel were doing business. And I want to call your attention to some key architectural elements in this building. This one in the corporate headquarters in Cleveland. Note the ornate pediments, the detailing on the corners, the pilasters, the loading docks. There's a common architectural vocabulary that runs through all of the City Ice and Fuel buildings that started to be constructed in the 1920s. So again, this is the one in the headquarters city of Cleveland. Here's another one, Federal Cold Storage Company building in St. Louis. Federal Cold Storage was one of the subsidiaries that the company used to expand and operate locally. So again, you can see this architectural vocabulary that was popular in the 1920s with the corporation, with the parapets, the elaborate corners. And again, not so much in this photo, but with this building, you can see some of the local architectural style manifesting itself in the facades. And then another one of the surviving Federal Cold Storage building photos, this one from Vernon, California, just on the edge of Los Angeles. Again, the same vocabulary here, the ornate parapets, the corners, the pilasters. This one's just a little more subdued, but you can see the local Southwest architectural motif that appears in the building facade. So as the City Ice and Fuel Company made its march throughout North America, they landed in Pittsburgh in 1929 and very quickly began announcing that all of Hubbard's ice companies were going to be merged and that there was going to be a massive new ice plant built and a large cold storage facility constructed adjacent to the brand new Pennsylvania Railroad produce yards. So you can see the legal aspect of this consolidation with all of the Hubbard companies reorganizing and being subsumed under a single operating company, the City Ice and Fuel Company, which was a subsidiary of the massive one in Cleveland, but in this case, headquartered here in Pennsylvania, domiciled here in Pennsylvania. And the Federal Cold Storage Company itself was a subsidiary that was created to manage and operate the cold storage building once it was completed. So here's the charter again, showing the original stockholders and corporate organization. These individuals were attorneys and businessmen in Pittsburgh who served sort of as the front men for the larger Cleveland entity. In early 1930, the Pittsburgh newspaper started covering the proposal to build the massive ice plant in the city's Strip District. They described it as the city's massive new refrigerator building. The Chicago-based Blom Sinek contracting company designed the new building. It was initially scoped out to be a 4 million cubic foot building, and ultimately became the third largest cold storage building in North America. The main building's design included double walls, each one 1 foot thick, and it was separated by a layer of powdered cork insulation obtained by the locally headquartered Armstrong Cork Company. The construction of the building itself became a spectacle, much like the demolition nearly a century later. Unlike the demolition, however, the building, the 7-story concrete building, went up fairly quickly. It went up in workmanlike fashion and actually got a lot of press coverage because of the cool technique used to pour the concrete in slip courses, and quickly brought the building up to its finished height. This is a diagram that sort of shows you the 2 stages in which the building was constructed. So you have the main 7-story federal cold storage building here on the left, and then the 2-story refrigerating and ice making annex on the right, adjacent, right up against actually the 16th Street Bridge. So from an industrial history, industrial archaeology, architectural history perspective, there are some really intriguing things going on with the design and construction of this building, including the use of these heavy structural concrete mushroom columns, which were the standard used in all of the cold storage warehouses in the City Ice and Fuel network. And what I find really cool about this shot is the Jameson Cold Storage Door Company actually pictured not just the exterior of one of the Federal Cold Storage Company buildings, but also the mushroom column with the warehouse designation showing the slot, in this case, a D. And you can see these stenciled letters again in the Pittsburgh variant, this one from a demolished mushroom column with the 16th Street Bridge in the background. So besides the structural concrete, the other important element in the building itself was the use of Armstrong Cork Company's cork insulation. And there were actually 2 types of cork insulation used in the building. First was the cork board insulation that was applied to the walls and the ceilings. This one, not the Pittsburgh building, but a similar federal cold storage building, again with the mushroom columns and the cork board there. And then you can see these fragments that I recovered from the public right-of-way as they were demolishing the building. This is a section of the wall itself that was attached. And then you can see another finished part of the wall here, the granulated cork to the back. So that was one part of the cork. The other part of the cork used was powdered cork that insulated the 2 concrete walls, the interior wall where the cork board was affixed, and then the exterior wall which faced the outside. And these brownish lenses here are the compressed powdered cork, and this is a sample that I recovered from the sidewalk itself. So besides the building, the concrete and cork that makes this an interesting, important part of Pittsburgh's built environment, there's also a significant bit of social history here. And the social history includes the people who worked in the cold storage building itself and in the adjacent buildings, which housed, among other things, the bar known as the Real Luck Cafe or Lucky's. So without getting too deep into the weeds about what went on in the cold storage building and how it fit into Pittsburgh's social and economic history, some key things did happen in the building related to social history. Among them were multiple labor actions between 1930 and the time that the Federal Cold Storage Company building sold the property in 1980. One of the more important labor actions occurred just at the tail end of World War II, which quite literally stalled the supply of food to military and civilian sources throughout the eastern United States. And you can see in this headline some of the impacts of that labor action. One of the things that brought me into this site as an element of Pittsburgh's organized crime history is the fact that the unions that were involved with the labor action applied a tremendous amount of pressure, not just on the owners of the corporate entities, but on the small wholesalers and retailers who relied on the cold storage facility to pick up their vegetables and fruits and sell them before they could go bad. And one of the episodes in the 1940 strike involved the intimidation of a McKeesport grocery owner named Paul Lomeo, who actually fought back against the unions and fought back against the cold storage company, took them to court, and was able to retrieve his produce and bring it back to his market, but not without problems. There was talk that the unions retaliated by perhaps killing one of his sons. And in fact, this became such a significant part of Pittsburgh's underworld history that one of Lomeo's grandsons actually wrote a book documenting the organized crime activities from the ice to the fire and the family's involvement with the mafia and the labor action. Beyond the mob and beyond the labor history, the Federal Cold Storage Company was also a headquarters for local divisions of national corporations like the Borden Food Company. In addition to storing produce and other things, the cold storage company's ice production plant, the refrigeration annex, that two-story building, also produced ice that was sold and distributed throughout the city of Pittsburgh for much of the 20th century before many homes became equipped with refrigerators and ice makers of their own. There were also several major accidents at the site itself, including some ammonia gas leaks, a few fires. So all in all, the property had a pretty remarkable and colorful history. Now, beyond the economic history, beyond the built environment, the building also became something of an inadvertent public artwork. In 1980, after the Federal Cold Storage Company sold the property, it was acquired by a market owner named the Robert Woolley Company, and they used it as their cold storage facility. They leased out space. And at one point in the 1980s, after the owner made a trip to Hong Kong and saw a large number of illuminated animals, he came back, started gushing about what an incredible sight it was. So some of his engineers decided to surprise him one Christmas and set up a large illuminated fish on the side of the building. The fish itself became part of a well-loved part of Pittsburgh's built environment and stayed long after the 1980s and was on the building up until the point when demolition began last year. In addition to the illuminated fish, the two-story annex was turned into a public art palette by a well-known and accomplished mural artist who reproduced panels of a 57 Chevy in the sealed up windows in the cold storage annex. Here's another shot from Penn Avenue showing the various parts of the 57 Chevy, the headlights, the grill, and other parts. So as I said, the building was slated for demolition, and that had been well known and covered in the local press for a couple of years. And I decided to, camp out across the street with a video camera, still camera, and document the process leading up to the slow death of this building. The Woolley Company, for about a decade, had actually tried to unload the building. Now imagine how difficult it is trying to sell a piece of commercial real estate with no windows, possible historical designation, and very few opportunities for adaptive use. So the potential resale adaptive use of the building made headlines not just here in Pittsburgh, but throughout the United States. And one key element in all of the descriptions of the building was the giant fish and how well beloved the fish was here in Pittsburgh. There was talk throughout the time that Woolley tried to unload the building about, saving that part of the facade and incorporating the fish into any potential redevelopment, relocating the illuminated fish to the nearby Heinz History Center. None of those came to fruition. The lights were removed, put into storage, and may at some point find themselves reconstructed at some point on the building. What will be constructed there is a massive multi-building office building, basically, and you can see the proposed redevelopment there in the slide. So the process to take the building down has been slow and painful, and the reason for that is Lucky's Cafe next door. So out of this mid-19th century block that was constructed, only Lucky's remains, and this gap here is about 4 inches, which separates the 1869 Real Luck Cafe building from the Federal Cold Storage building. So the developer tried to buy the Lucky site. The bar owner would not sell. So the redevelopment had to come up with an approach to taking down this massive concrete building that didn't damage or destroy the Real Luck Cafe. And the system that they came up with was pretty creative, and we'll get into that in a moment. But in addition to the organized crime history associated with the cold storage building, the Real Luck Cafe itself also has an organized crime history. Over the past 3 years, I've discovered that you can't lift any rock or look under any building foundation in the city of Pittsburgh without finding an organized crime history. The Real Luck Cafe is the successor to the Shamrock Cafe, which was opened by the wife of a well-known numbers racketeer, Ralph Blakely, in the mid-1950s. And she ran it for almost a quarter of a century, and it became a popular mob hangout as well as popular neighborhood bar. One of the fun stories associated with the Real Luck Cafe and the Shamrock Cafe, and this is Ralph and Victoria Blakely's daughter, Roberta, who grew up in the bar and who grew up steeped in Pittsburgh's organized crime history. So this watch was given to her in the 1950s by racketeer Jakey Lerner, who is the subject of the first article that I wrote on Pittsburgh's organized crime history. So you can see these sort of closing circles, and the watch that Jake Lerner gave her, he also gave an identical watch to his daughter, Sherlyn, also in the 1950s. So how did the developer come up with this process to protect Lucky's? Well, they couldn't come in with a wrecking ball and heavy equipment and just bash the building into concrete rubble. That would have introduced vibrations and other issues that might have threatened Lucky's. So what they did is they first installed seismic sensors in Lucky's and other adjacent buildings, and then they staged the cold storage building to take it down in pieces. So the first thing that was done in the late summer, early fall of last year was multiple holes were bored in the facade of the cold storage building adjacent to Lucky's. You can see in this shot the platform which was placed inside the large bore holes, which was put to collect things that might have fallen onto Lucky's roof, which is right here. Medium bore holes, these right here, you can actually see a choker going through, were drilled to attach chokers, which were then attached to a crane lift the wall segments out. And then the small boreholes, you can see them here, and you can actually see a saw line here, were drilled so that diamond-edged rope saw could be attached, and the rope saw used to cut through the final segments of the wall itself. So taking this building down not only was time consuming, but very expensive. The developer had to get $1 million grant to help subsidize its demolition from the state of Pennsylvania. They got their grant and they began on-site activities with drilling the holes. So here's a shot from September of last year, just before demolition began, close-ups of the medium bore holes and the small bore holes. And then here's the shot of the first thing to start coming down, the two-story cold storage annex where the ice plant was located. There was also a Duquesne Light substation attached to this building. So throughout the process, as I said, I took photos and shot video literally from the start of the process up until earlier today, which we'll see in a little bit. So here's the process as it moved forward. The cold storage annex is almost completely gone at this point, and you can see the back of the Rilla Cafe and the full northern facade of the cold storage building exposed at this point. The work in progress on the cold storage annex and the disappearing murals, another shot of the murals in December of last year. I alerted one of the local preservation organizations to the impending demolition and loss of the murals, so they were able to work with the city of Pittsburgh, and the developer carefully, if you want to use that word, removed the murals, put them aside, and ultimately in February of this year, they were relocated to an artist studio, and they'll be incorporated into a new artwork by an artist who uses found elements of Pittsburgh's built environment to create new artwork pieces. February of 2022, the removal of the wall segments began. And again, you can see the chokers attached to the medium bore holes and the crane there. So I'm going to run a video now that walks you through the various stages of this slow motion demolition, and I'll talk over the video to describe what's happening. Just want to point your eyes to this protrusion here. This is a circular saw that is being used to cut the rest of the way through the wall segment. The individual wall segments that were removed weighed as much as 40 tons. So you can see the piece, after it's been fully separated from the structure itself, is being lifted by the crane and is going to be carried over Lucky's, which is right here, to the staging area, which was created in the site where the two-story ice plant annex was located. This is a shot of the workers. This is 7 stories up. This is the parapet of the original building, and they're running the chokers through the medium bore holes to be attached to the crane. Now just keep your eye sort of focused on that hole right there. So he pulls the choker in. Then the crane swings around, attaches the choker to the crane itself, and then the wall segments are lifted out one by one. So it took almost 2 months for them to pull individual wall segments out this fashion. You can see the powdered cork compressed in between the walls in the shot. You can also see that also see the double roof here. The original roof for the cold storage building, and then a later roof put on to repair damage to the original roof. Now, here's the two segments of the wall being removed, and you can see the former U.S. Steel Tower there in the background in downtown. Again, this platform was constructed to protect the roof of Lucky's from debris falling onto it and damaging the building or injuring people inside. In addition to taking the walls out in that fashion, they also took the solid concrete floors out in the same way. So you can see this entire part of the building had to be removed piecemeal simply to protect the historic Lucky's building. After they completed removing the exterior and the individual floors, they brought in this concrete pulverizer to individually break up the building into little pieces, convert it into rubble, and then take it off to an offsite landfill out in Westmoreland County. So here we are about 6 weeks into the demolition at this point. Demolition of the main building, which began in February after they finished with the annex building. You got to imagine the guys running the crane itself have the crane and the pulverizer, which they nicknamed the Muncher, have to be having some fun here. I mean, this is like going to one of those arcade machines and using the crane tool to pick out your prize. There's a little farther into the process with the pulverizer working on the interior of the building. Again, just taking it apart piece by piece, breaking up the rubble. The metal elements were separated and taken to a recycling facility, and the concrete rubble is being taken to a landfill. So is the pulverizer working on one of the last remaining sections of the exterior wall. You can see the size of the pieces that are being removed. Sort of explains why it's taking more than a year to demolish this incredibly substantial building. So that's what it looks like today. Most of the exterior walls are gone. The shots taken from the 16th Street Bridge. This wall, from what I understand, is going to remain. It's going to be refined a little bit, but it'll remain and will protect the Lucky's site as the new construction goes up and as the development opens sometime in the future. Another shot, again, the Lucky's building here and the exposed interior of what's left of the federal cold storage building. And then just another shot a little farther down on Penn Avenue. So with that, I put on some QR codes. You can snap them with your phone, or after I close this screen out, I'll stick the links. I've written a few things on the cold storage building and on Lucky's, one of them published in the SIA newsletter earlier this year, one for the Urban History Association, and another for a local journalism outlet. So if you don't snap the QR codes now, just hold on and I'll put the links into the chat. And with that, I'd like to thank you for attending.